So Jacob, thank you for taking the time to talk to me and the students at the University of Waterloo today. You are a former student of Waterloo, and so you will be familiar with the environment that you're talking to. But I'm very interested in the work that you've been doing with artificial intelligence and with OpenAI. So I thought I would start just by asking you to tell me about your role at OpenAI and how your career has led you to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work as a research scientist on the reinforcement learning team. And what we're primarily interested in is how to improve our reinforcement learning algorithms so that they can learn from less data. So reinforcement learning is a branch of machine learning where you're trying to operate in potentially a very complex environment. It's really like an incredibly general problem you're trying to solve. You're just operating in some environment. You have some goal that you want to achieve, and you can take actions. But those actions, could have effects many seconds, many minutes in the future. And so it's very general. It could potentially scale to environments like the real world, and it's currently being used. You can use it to perform well in video games or robotics, and we hope that one day we could use it to make systems that operate in the real world. But the main problem we need to solve is that they currently use too much data. And so as far as how my career led me to this, I graduated from Waterloo last August with a degree in computer science. I did lots of internships at tech companies, and I was really interested in machine learning because the capabilities of the machine learning systems are advancing really quickly. And so specifically, I did an internship at OpenAI last fall, and I also created a productivity tool called Tab9, which uses some of OpenAI's models that they released publicly to be like a productivity tool to help you write code.
Very interesting, and we're going to talk a lot more about the things that you've been working on, or a bit more about the things you've been working on. But clearly areas that are important today. Can you tell me about what OpenAI is, what the organization does, and maybe some of its main achievements so far?
Sure. So OpenAI is primarily a research organization, and at a high level, the goal is to ensure that advanced AI systems are beneficial for humanity. And what that translates to on a day-to-day level is that we perform research in AI and try to influence AI policy. The idea behind this being that the best way to shape the impact of a new technology is to be the ones to build it. So some of the main achievements include making the first AI system that could beat the best humans at the video game Dota 2, creating a controller which can manipulate a robotic hand to solve a Rubik's Cube, and the language system GPT-2, which approached human-level fluency in English.
Very interesting, and I was really interested by the fact that that as you mentioned, OpenAI is working at a policy level to understand, how AI can be used for good, and at the same time, you're working on the technical side of it to develop key aspects of AI, I guess, that others will use, which will promote this good behavior. So that's a crucial position to be in, and potentially extremely influential. So it's very interesting to be able to talk to you about it. You're focused, and I noticed on the description that's on OpenAI's website, that you specifically mentioned that you're focused on artificial general intelligence, as opposed to, or not necessarily opposed to, but in addition to probably, artificial intelligence itself. So for people who don't know, can you tell them what the general means and how that influences what you do?
So the definition we use for artificial intelligence is that it's a system which outperforms humans at most economically valuable work. And we like having this sort of high-level focus because it keeps you focused on the long term. Which is not to say we don't care about what happens in the short term. It's just good to sort of take the long view on these things sometimes.
Yep. That makes sense. And so you started to talk about some of the research that OpenAI does. Could you just provide me with an overview or a summary of the main areas that the research is being done in at the moment?
Yeah, so the main areas we focus on, and this isn't exhaustive, but broadly there's generative modeling, which refers to creating systems which can synthesize things like images, text, or music, and so on. And one of the big reasons we're interested in that is because a system that can synthesize realistic text, probably you could say it understands the text on some level, so you can expect it to be useful for many other tasks involving text. Same with images, any other domain. It's like a really general way of acquiring knowledge about that domain. We also do research in reinforcement learning, both directly on just how to make better reinforcement learning algorithms, like on my team, or trying to apply it at scale to solve hard problems, like when we created a system which could beat the best humans at Dota 2, or used it to control a robotic hand, and in our hide and seek release last summer, where different agents develop some interesting capabilities by using reinforcement learning to try to interact with each other. And another big focus is safety, which roughly speaking means trying to ensure, well, I guess at a high level it's very broad, and it's essentially the whole mission of the company, which is to ensure that strong AI systems are good for humanity. And one of the big research agendas that we have concretely in that direction is trying to have AI systems figure out what you want. So one of the big problems in this field is, in order to make an AI system do something, you have to sort of define a number that represents how well it's doing and then optimize that number. But for some fuzzy things that we might desire, like, make the world a better place or make people happy and fulfilled, it can be quite difficult to specify such a number. So one of the things the safety team works on is ways to sort of bridge this gap between things that are qualitative and things that are quantitative.
Very interesting. And so as far as the contribution that OpenAI has made so far, you've mentioned some of the things that you've been able to do, but would you be able to describe for the students how what has been developed so far might change things that they might see in the world? So you mentioned the Rubik's Cube and the dexterity that there is involved with that. I saw the video. It's one hand manipulating a Rubik's Cube and solving the Rubik's Cube problem. And presumably in practice, for other organizations or people, there are many potential applications of that sort of technology. So how would you say OpenAI has changed capabilities, I guess, of technology? How might we see this in the real world?
So it obviously in the distant future, it could change things in all sorts of ways that are pretty difficult to predict. Currently, some of the areas it's impacting are things like speech recognition, image recognition, speech synthesis, things like that. One of the things that we at OpenAI are particularly excited about is using AI systems that operate in some kind of modality where humans express themselves, like text, music, something like that, and having the system be sort of a co-creator, something that can maybe it's not going to write your song for you, but it can generate, maybe 10 different possible riffs, and then you take one of them and you're like, oh, that sounds kind of interesting, and then you can sort of use it as a tool to help generate new ideas for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and presumably, that could be useful for many types of creation. Music-based creation, text-based creation, potentially video-based creation of some kind too?
That's right. As far as like concrete things people have already done, there have been a couple novels that have been sort of co-written with our language system GPT-2, and there was, I believe, a symphony co-created with the music generation system MuseNet that we released. I think someone generated or used it to help them write a continuation of Mahler's Unfinished Symphony. And obviously Mahler's dead, so we can't exactly replicate what he would have done, but a system that's trained specifically on Mahler's music can maybe help you out to generate something that is the sort of thing he would have written.
And presumably also I'm thinking about potential business applications of this type of technology. The first one that comes to mind for me is that if we were looking at a financial services organization or a manufacturing organization, the ability to consolidate many sources of data that might influence the configuration of their operations would be something that this might be capable of. It would be able to incorporate a number of different qualitative and quantitative factors and determine what the optimal or configuration of operations to address those demands on the services that were being offered, right?
Yes. So as far as commercial applications, let's see. So in general, the biggest challenge for applying an AI system in a commercial application is to have like a very, very clearly define what the inputs to the system are and what exactly is the metric that you want to optimize. And often, once you've done this, you've already done most of the work, and your precise choice of what model to use is not super important at that point. So I think AI is very useful in many different places in industry, and it's also, but at the same time, it's important to draw a distinction between places where the value is coming just from having sort of centralized your data and clearly defined your problem, and places where the problem, even given the data, is very challenging to solve, and so you need some sort of bleeding edge, fresh off the presses model in order to do it.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, it seems relevant today, particularly with the world changing so quickly and organizations needing to change quickly in response to that changing world, that is causing them to, on a continuing basis, to consolidate many different sources of information and to continuously change what they do. And it seems AI would be, in the way that you describe it, would be a useful tool to help that to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's lots of places where AI could potentially be applied. And in many cases, it can be sort of, you have so many choices about what to potentially do that the biggest challenge is not identifying a place where it could provide value, but rather figuring out where you can get where it's easiest to define the problem specifically that you want to optimize.
Sure. Okay, so for my next question is around what are the challenges, what are the things that are most difficult that you're going to be focusing on next? So you've described things that you're very successfully working on at the moment. What are the things that you see as being the challenges that will need to be worked on in the future?
So the biggest, well, this is not a view that's universally shared, but one of the biggest challenges in the field of machine learning is that although systems can learn very impressive capabilities, they require a vast amount of data in order to do it. And when you look at the amount of experience that's required by a reinforcement learning system to learn, let's say, a video game, and compare it to the amount of experience required by a human child, the human child will learn many orders of magnitude faster. And so we think the answer to this question lies in the fact that, you know, in a certain sense, the child is learning very quickly, but in another sense, the child has several hundred millions of years of experience given to them sort of indirectly by the process of evolution, but given to them nonetheless. So one promising angle for making AI systems that can learn from less data is to give them some ways to acquire a lot of experience from some area where data is plentiful, and then transfer that understanding to an area where data is not plentiful. And so this is one of the biggest reasons we're interested in generative modeling of text, music, images, and so on, is not solely because the system can generate the stuff, but because generating the stuff lets you acquire a sort of more general understanding. Okay,
so you're saying the area where where you think work is needed in the future is this idea of being able to create general understanding from specific information.
Yes, general understanding as defined by being able to learn from not much data.
Okay, that's good. That's very helpful to know. Okay, I want to talk a little bit more now about work that OpenAI has been doing. One of them has been the resources that you create for others to use in their work with AI. And I've seen some of those on your website. And if you could just describe the work that is done there. There may be some people watching who may wish to use those resources. So if you could tell them about those, it would be helpful.
Yeah, so probably the most widely used piece of software that we've released is the OpenAI Gym, which is essentially an interface for people to define environments for a reinforcement learning agent. And that is really useful because if you've created like a reinforcement learning algorithm and someone else has created a reinforcement learning environment, you would like to be able to design your pieces of software in such a way that they can interoperate without you having to specifically write code that bridges to that specific environment. So that solves an important problem for people. More generally, the reason we like to release software like this is pretty similar to the reason people release open source software in general, which is, first of all, obviously it raises your profile and helps with recruiting and your brand and that kind of thing. Also, if you're a organization that does a lot of research in, say, reinforcement learning like us, it's very useful to everyone in the community to standardize on some set of tools. And so, especially if they standardize on our tools because we are already familiar with them and all our stuff already works with them. And finally, it's good to have a common system of benchmarks and evaluation suites. So one thing that my team recently released is the ProcGen benchmark, which is short for procedurally generated games benchmark, which we think will be very helpful in figuring out which reinforcement learning algorithms are good and which ones are not, which is obviously something we're very interested in because we run reinforcement learning systems at large scale.
Very good. And another thing you've worked on is that OpenAI has worked on is the OpenAI Charter. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, so OpenAI was founded as a nonprofit, and its goal is to further these goals, which are defined in the OpenAI Charter. So especially when you're working with something that means many different things to many different people, such as AI, it's very helpful to have a document defining what your high-level goals are so that everyone knows what you mean when you talk about things.
That makes sense. And what does it identify as the main goals?
The main goal is to ensure that artificial general intelligence is beneficial for humanity, and since we don't know exactly what those systems will look like, it could have many different, that could mean many different things down the line. But we want but what we mean by beneficial for humanity is that the benefits should be broadly distributed. It shouldn't just be beneficial for the people who develop the system. And we want to avoid any kind of race between different AI organizations because such a race could create incentives to build something as quickly as possible without considering without sort of taking the care to ensure that it's beneficial. And that's something our policy team has written about. And we think, although a race might seem inevitable, in fact, everyone would benefit by having AI that's deployed carefully and safely. And so we don't think it's impossible to achieve cooperation on that angle.
Okay, and so as you have worked in the world of AI, you've been able to see what's happening with it now. How do you think it's going to turn out? Do you think overall that AI is going to be used as a force for good, or do you have concerns that that bad things could happen and that we need to do things to prevent that?
Well, I personally am hopeful that in the long run, technological progress will ultimately be good for society, but it is definitely a important problem to work on. And of course, it's the whole reason OpenAI exists, is that it's not just automatically going to be good for everyone.
So you seem to be saying that you think it can be good, but we need to make sure that we do the things that will make that happen.
That's right. Yes.
Okay, very good. That's clear. I just got two further questions then. The first one is OpenAI talks about the need for responsible AI development, and I think you've described that largely already, maybe. But is there anything you'd want to add on that topic?
So one example of something that we think would be part of responsible AI development is that if you and some organization, you think you're both close to being to developing some kind of system that is very advanced and very powerful, that you should consider cooperating even at some cost to your own organization in order to prevent some kind of situation where something gets deployed too quickly without thought to the potential downsides.
Okay, that seems fairly clear. So you're worried that the power that AI has needs to be very carefully managed. So the fear you seem to be expressing is that if AI is released too quickly, then bad things that could happen because there will be unanticipated impacts of what has been created. Is that what you mean there?
That's right. One thing about software is that once it's created, it has zero marginal costs of distribution. And so if an AI system is released, then anyone in the world can copy it and use it for their own purposes.
Mm-hmm.
So you can imagine that if the system is very capable and good at a wide range of tasks, then it could quickly be adapted to fulfill tasks by bad actors.
Yep, that makes sense. Okay, I just got one final question. I'm grateful to you for what you've had to say so far. But my final question is for people who may be thinking about a career in AI today, do you have any advice that you would want to give them?
It's difficult to give strong advice about this sort of thing because I don't want to overfit to my own experience. But I can say a couple things. One is that the information and the tools to start working with AI are out there. I mean, in some cases, it requires some computing resources, but there is a lot that you can do with just a laptop. And the second thing is that it really depends what sort of AI, what exactly you want your career in AI to look like. If you want to work on building AI systems in industry, probably the best thing to do is to start trying to build AI systems now. If you want to work in academia, then it's probably a good idea to find professors who will work with you and try to do research with them.
Okay. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today, Jacob. It's been very interesting and valuable to hear about the work that OpenAI are doing. Clearly, it is important. There is a lot of discussion expressing concern about the impact that AI may have, and to know that OpenAI are trying to influence things for good, that is clearly a very good thing. So thanks for taking the time to talk to me today, and good luck in your new job in San Francisco.
Thanks so much. It was my pleasure. And there's something I forgot to mention for my last answer, which is one good resource if you're interested in reinforcement learning is the Spinning Up in Deep RL, which is a tutorial created by OpenAI to teach people about reinforcement learning.
Thank you.
Absolutely.